Hey everyone, Adam here. Before today's show, I ask you all please to go over to my Instagram and give me a follow at Behind the Life Podcast. I'm also now on Twitter at Behind the Life 3. You can now listen to all episodes on Stitcher, iTunes, Spotify, YouTube, TuneIn, and just say, Alexa, play Behind the Life Podcast. Enjoy today's episode. On today's show, I'm going behind the life of Luke Sutton. Luke is a retired English cricketer who played for Somerset, Derbyshire and Lancashire. He is also a successful businessman and co-founder of Activate Management, who have clients on their books such as Sam Quek, Now Wilson and James Taylor. But Luke's life didn't always look so positive. Over the last few months, Luke has been in the spotlight, touring the country, talking about his book, Back from the Edge, Mental Health and Addiction. It is his personal story where he talks openly, honestly and candidly about his battles with alcohol, tragic events in his life and his time he spent in the Priory. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Behind the Life of Luke Sutton. Hi Luke, how are you?
Very well. Thank you very much for having me on.
No, thank you for coming on, Luke. You have been very busy recently. How are you finding doing all these interviews? Would you prefer to be behind the stumps?
It has been a strange experience, actually, because since I'd stopped playing cricket, I don't think I'd really given an interview. And then I've obviously been managing a number of high-profile people, so I've always been under the radar as such. I've been, managing people through that experience. So obviously with the book, I've come to the forefront again. And early on, I found it quite unsettling. I've kind of found my rhythm now, and I feel passionately about the book and everything around it. So I found my flow, but definitely at the start, I did feel quite uncomfortable with it all.
Well, let's talk about the show, Luke. So Behind the Life, it's basically where I talk to interesting people about their interesting lives. Over the next 30 minutes or so, we'll dissect your life. And I'm made up that you've come onto the show today, Luke. I really am. Let's start in chronological order with your career. So your childhood, your father worked in the oil business. What was it like,
yeah.
Growing up with your childhood? I believe you lived around the world, basically.
Yeah, we did. It was quite an unusual way of life. It was brilliant, but we kind of were always on the move. We would go to, but basically wherever there was oil or gas in the world, we tended to go to for normally 2 to 3 years. And so I spent very little time in England when I was, up to about when I went to boarding school at the age of 8 or 9, I'd really, my first language, because of the time that we were in Peru, was effectively Spanish. And we just moved around. My first experiences were in a country called the Oman, and then we moved on to Peru. And whilst we were midair on our way to Peru, the Falklands War broke out, so that was a bit tense. And then we came back to Holland for a bit. Then we were in Norway. Then another spell in Holland. And it was amazing because I got to experience cultures in different parts of the world that many other kids don't. But it was very transient. I was very used to kind of making friends and then kind of saying goodbye and moving on to the next place. But living in a country like Peru when I was 5, 6 years old was just absolutely eye-opening in lots and lots of different ways. And it taught me a lot of really good stuff, but it was different for sure. And obviously then I ended up in boarding school because effectively particularly my mum was really worried about this kind of lifestyle and what it was doing to my education and what would happen if anything happened to my mum and dad. I really had no experience of living in Europe at all. So that's how boarding school came along.
So what was your greatest sort of, memory growing up as a kid? You write really passionately about Peru in your book.
It's definitely Peru. Those are my most profound memories, really. I remember I just remember the dirty roads, and I remember always being in the back of the car, and kind of it was always chaotic on the roads, and dirty and dusty. But I loved it. I played outside all the time, and I had Spanish friends, Peruvian friends. We used to play football all the time. The weekends, we lived the expat life, and we'd go to the country club, and it sounds all a bit rah-de-rah, but it wasn't really. We were with the Spanish and or the South Americans rather, and it was a lot of sport, a lot of being outside. It was great. It was different, but it was brilliant.
So sort of looking back now, you, as you mentioned, turned about 8 or 9, and then you went to Millfield boarding school. That is quite a drastic change for any young child. Living this life, abroad. Having a sort of a really fun time. You were so close to your mum as well. I believe what I've read in your book. How did you find going to that transition straight into a boarding school?
I found it horrendous. I can't really describe it in any other way. It was just like falling off a cliff. I've spoken to my mum and dad a lot about it, so I'm not sort of saying anything that we haven't spoken about. And we've had our time talking about it, and but it's just like being thrown in the deep end. And I had an exceptionally close relationship with my mum, and suddenly you're at a boarding school and you're sharing a room with other boys you don't know. There's just the whole dynamic around it is just it's completely alien. And take into account that I'd not really spent a lot of time in England, so I was a bit like a foreigner. And it was daunting, and you just learn very quickly how to survive in that environment. I mean, when I that sounds like I was going to prison. It's not as dramatic as that, but it's tough. It is really, really tough. You're 8, 9 years old, and suddenly you're dropped off in a house. And in my second year there, I shared a room with 17 other boys, and it's just a whole big experience. And it was a big deal. The first week we were allowed one phone call home, which was only 10 minutes, and you got your 10 minutes, and then that was it. And then in the end of the second week, you were allowed to go out or go for the weekend to see your mum. And I mean, I remember those moments like they were yesterday, and not for good reasons, really. It was sort of deeply upsetting for me at that time. But it is very much like being thrown off at the deep end, and it's really tough.
How did that sort of change you as a child? Did it mentally affect you at that age?
I think, I was a boarder for basically 10 years, from then till I left school at 18. I think what happens over a period of time is you become very independent, because you really, and I mean independent from your parents. You grow up with your support network is your peers. It's the other people you're there with. If you get into trouble, you don't call your mum and dad. You reach out to your mates, the people around you, and they're all going through what you're going through. So you're all kind of, growing up together in this slightly weird way. And you definitely become independent of your parents, but you definitely develop a really strong kind of survival mechanism, because you're on your own to a large extent. And there's massive elements even today, even after everything that I've kind of the whole journey I've been through, which I talk about boarding school, and someone could probably interpret a lot of negativity, and there is probably more negativity at that age than positivity, I would say. However, there's most definitely things that I developed when I was a boarder that have kept me in good stead. And when I went into professional sport, that kind of survival mechanism to learn to stand on my own 2 feet was really, really important.
Well, that really comes through in your book, Luke, when you're talking about getting into sport when you're at Millfield, especially swimming, which was your number one sport. And one constant thing that runs through the book is your ego, which you touch on quite a lot. Would you say that was the beginning of your competitiveness and how your ego started?
It just really makes me laugh. It was. I was a pain in the ass as a young kid. I was just
swear, Luke.
yeah. I was just cocky and very competitive, and I was spoilt to a large degree because my mum just told me I was the greatest thing since sliced bread every 2 minutes. So, and I really did think I was. So, it did. I did. I was that kid, and I. But I guess underneath it all, though, it still was quite a lot of bravado. Underneath it all, I was still quite a nervous character, and that being away from my mum and dad so much, I did at times still seek out that affirmation that I wanted, and I did carry a bit of an ego at times, but or a cockiness. That's probably a better way of describing it, competitiveness. But I was also quite nervy at times and insecure, and over time that sort of got worse and worse, really.
So would you say, you were quite an introvert, but you were covering that up by bringing this bravado of cockiness on?
100%. That's the perfect way to describe it. And I actually, in my recovery, really, I discovered that about myself, that I thought I was really extroverted because I always wanted to be social. I always wanted to be the life and soul of the party. And I always wanted to be everyone's friend because I cared so much about what everyone thought about me. But in this kind of time where I've really got to know who I am really introverted. I'm much happier just staying at home with my fiance and the kids, and not going out to big social occasions. But definitely throughout my childhood and then as a young adult, I faked it. I faked being an extrovert because I cared so much about what people thought of me, and actually deep down, I wasn't that person.
So then you went up to Durham. So you went to Durham University. Was that when really, you touched on before, sometimes, you like to, stay in and have a quiet night. But see, as a student, it's all about the social scene. It's all about going out, getting pissed. Is that when you really came across alcohol for the first time and thought, hang on, I need to get over this introvert side by just going out and trying to fit into the social scene and getting drunk?
I mean, my drinking at Durham was really heavy. But I mean, that's not unusual for a lot of students. But no, I think for me, and I will sort of caveat what I'm saying. A lot of what I talk about, a lot of people feel it. It was just that for me, it became very extreme, and in the end, it started to destroy me. So, saying that you feel a bit nervous in a social situation, you have a couple of drinks to calm your nerves. Lots of people feel like that, for sure. There's nothing necessarily wrong with that. And I think for me that what I discovered at university, though, was I had that feeling, and then I would start drinking, and there was never a reason to stop, and I didn't have it in me to stop. I would just keep going and going and going and going. And I guess it was those early signs in my early 20s where deep down I knew I'd get comments even from sort of big, heavy drinking mates of mine around my drinking or my behavior. And I used to sort of deep down think, I don't know what I'm doing here. I can't control this. It was like I was off. And that was the difference for me. Once I started drinking, I just didn't really know where it was going to finish. And I just laugh along with it and just think it was all part of my way. But, deep down, if I was totally honest, there were times where I was just like, bloody hell, what is going on?
And how did that affect your studies, Luke? What did you go on and graduate with?
No, I did all right. If I'm totally honest, is because at that time, the rules on how you could do well at Durham University around the way the exams were structured was absolutely ridiculously easy. So I was not a hard-working student. I think I attended 3 lectures in my second year, and I attended 0 in my last year. And my first year would have been slightly better, but not much, maybe 10 lectures. But I managed to purchase some unbelievable revision notes from someone who'd got a first a couple of years previously. I met him, and he said, "Well, I'm selling my revision notes and my essays. This is in my second year." So I bought them off him, and I'd never seen a more immaculate, well-organized. This guy was a machine, and his notes were phenomenal. I mean, he analysed what essay questions would come up, and he was just unbelievable. So all I did was I just memorised everything he put in those revision notes, and I didn't get a first, but I did get a 2-1 in the end. But please don't in any way make that, take the assumption that I worked really hard for that. I really didn't. And basically, I'm rabbiting on a bit now, but you had 9 papers to do, and however well you did in your 5th paper, your 5th best paper is what you got. And you did 4 papers in your second year, and then you did your dissertation, you did 4 in your last year. And I bought the revision notes in my second year, and I got 4 2-1s because of it. So I only needed to get 1 more 2-1 from my dissertation and 4 other exams in the third year to get a 2-1, and that's what happened. So, yeah, they have changed the rules since. I will add.
Yeah, and every listeners out there, we say do not go and buy people's revision papers, please.
Unless they're really good.
Unless they're really good, of course. So what did you do after you graduated from university?
Well, I already had a contract with Somerset at the time. And so, yeah, when I finished the sort of term time at Durham, I'd go back and play for Somerset. And that was still going on. And then when Durham finished, I just became a full-time professional. So I was, pretty much full-time professional. And Durham had a really rich cricket, a culture and team. And Graham Fowler was the coach, and we were effectively a sort of semi-professional outfit anyway.
And was that the first time you really came in contact with working with professional sportsmen? And is that when you start feeling the pressures as well?
No, that was at school. I mean, Millfield is the most extraordinary school you could imagine. I was obviously a really good cricketer, and I was England under-15s captain, and I was England Player of the Year one year, and I was sort of celebrated at the school and heralded. But trust me, I wasn't sort of a standout. There was kids who were competing for Olympics, and guys going into professional rugby, and it just was so many talented sports people. That was when I even at school, where I felt that kind of environment of being with the elite and that pressure around it. I think Durham, it was university, it was a bit blurry. At Somerset in the early days, I was in the second team, so I was just trying to battle my way to get into the first team. It was really when I moved on to Derbyshire, when I started to play more first team regular cricket, that I was kind of playing with the big boys then, and that's where it all started.
And how did you deal with those pressures when you became a professional cricketer?
I'm saying this with the benefit of hindsight. I wasn't aware of it at the time, but I now look back and understand control. And I write about this in the book. In my book, control was just a massive thing in my life. So I dealt with pressure by control. So I was a control freak. I controlled everything from my practice, my eating, my sleep, I was fanatical about what I needed to do, but that extended beyond that. So then it became, I wanted to control what people thought about me. I wanted to control what people said about me. I just became this, and that was the way I was dealing with the pressure, by, in my mind, putting these kind of boundaries around what could happen. It felt like I had things under control. And then the great irony was then when it came too much for me and I would need an out, need a release, I'd start drinking and I'd have no control. And then I'd just go back through this cycle again of trying to desperately get hold of control. So, again, there are elements of that which other sports people will totally understand, and it wouldn't have got to the places it got to with me, but it just got extreme. And in the end, I sort of fell out the bottom of it. But if you look at somebody like Johnny Wilkinson, he now talks about his career, and I obviously was not up to his standard in relatively, but that's how he dealt with pressure, with control, absolute precision control of everything he was doing. And and it absolutely burnt him out. And he's had his own battles with mental health issues, which he's really honest around. But that level of control can be something which can be a very familiar characteristic in people who are trying to deal with pressure at a high level.
So when you were drinking, like anybody who goes out, gets drunk, you lose control. Did that make you feel guilty the next day?
Yeah, definitely. And what I would do, my behavior, and when I'd wake up the next day and I'd get mates ringing me going, "Oh, wasn't last night fun?" And I'd be wanting to climb under the bed, and I didn't, I was like, "Well, what happened?" And, how did that happen? And I have this sort of crippling anxiety and shame. And I guess I just sort of told myself that's the way it was, and that's just the way I behaved. And I was just a bit loose. And, when everyone else decided it was time to go home, I was just kind of moving into third gear. But deep down, there was within that kind of, I don't know, macho front of laughing along with it, I was dying inside. I didn't want to do that. I didn't want to be that person. I wasn't proud of that person at all, and it was killing me. It was really rotting away at me.
And how did that affect your cricket then? Did it affect your game?
It's a good question. I've been asked that a few times, and I prided myself on being able to back it up and turn up and perform and be a warrior and never kind of make excuses, and never, I was always one for playing through injury. I was always one for going beyond what was expected. And I actually think a lot of the time that was the kind of the rebalance in my mind for my behavior at times off the field, was to sort of absolutely never cut a corner on the field. And I guess that pushed me through a lot of times when I really needed it. I don't mind saying I scored 100 once at Hampshire, last game of the season, and Shane Warne was playing, and I didn't sleep a minute the night before. And I remember waiting to go into bat thinking, I have got to pull this out the bag. I have got to pull this out of the bag, because, I can't, I've really let myself down, and I've got to do it. And I did. And weirdly, I kind of celebrate it in my mind and go, "My God, I'm capable of doing these things."
Yeah.
And it was just that force of nature that would push me through. But the one thing I would say about how it did affect my game is I retired, obviously, when I came out of the Priory. I was 35, and I had played for a long time, but I knew other guys who pushed on to their 40, and I definitely wasn't there. I was burnt out. Just my way of playing cricket and my way of living just was burning me out, and there's no way I could have carried on.
But that, the game you said then against Shane Warne, one of the best bowlers ever been, and you hit over 100, but you had no sleep the night before. That must have made you feel, I'm untouchable here. I can go out. I can drink what I want.
Yeah, to some extent it did, and I'd celebrate it, that kind of, but I knew it was wrong, and I knew I wouldn't get away with it very often. And, there was sort of certain dynamics in that game that allowed me to get away with it then at that time. But yeah, it did. And I guess I just thought it was all part of my life, that it just had this sort of, I sort of really try and describe it in the book, this extreme behavior. And I just thought it was my balance, that I had to have this really extreme behavior off the field to balance my extreme behavior on the field, because my intensity around training and practice and matches, I was really intense. So I was the guy who was absolutely on it, and I was driving teammates forward. And if anyone was slacking, I was in their face. That's why I was a leader. I was a bit of a nightmare at times, just pushing people all the time. But I guess it was the counterbalance of what was going on off the field. And it's just a really kind of weird, imbalance that you think is a balance.
And, we'll turn on to your drinking and the word alcoholic, which is it's a huge word to use. On a previous show, I've interviewed a former alcoholic, and there's a saying out there to cover up being alcoholic. They'll set themselves times during the day. So they'll say, well, if I don't drink before 11 o'clock in the morning, I'm okay. My drinking's under control. Was that the case for yourself? Did you set any times when you thought, yeah, if I don't drink before this time, I'm fine?
I mean, I feel really passionately about the use of the phrase alcoholic, because I don't think it's always used helpfully, if I'm perfectly honest, which some people won't agree with that, and that's absolutely their prerogative. But, I remember in my sort of towards the end, when I ended up in the Priory in that kind of last 2-3 weeks, I remember the thought of starting, that when I would wake up, I would start drinking. And I did, that's what I did. And that's clearly a problem. That's clearly, you're really just becoming a 24-hour drinker, because you're just topping up, and then you just, keep going until you pass out, and then you keep on going. And I think I didn't at that moment go, oh, this is really bad. I was so poorly, I actually thought it made real sense. I thought, no, I need to do this. This sort of calms my nerves and allows me to get on with the day. And I never thought I crossed the line. I never thought that I was sort of wrapped up in well, this is just the way I am. But I think everyone's perception of what an alcoholic is slightly different. Some people think it's the park bench drunk. Yeah. Other people it's who, they brush their teeth with whiskey. Other people think it's, they sit in the pub all day. The one thing I've learned through my time in the Priory and through all the recovery meetings I've been to over the years, and all the people I've met with difficulties with addictive behaviour, is it comes in all shapes and sizes, and it's not the quantity of it, it's the effect of it, and that's really important. And if we take the word alcoholic, then they have a benchmark which is based on a perception of what they think an alcoholic is. And then they have friends around them who have different perceptions of what an alcoholic is. And everyone's trying to discuss whether this person's an alcoholic based on completely different perceptions and benchmarks. And it's really difficult, and it's not helpful. And, when I came out of the Priory, I didn't want to drink again. I wanted to change my life. But there was definitely people around me who were very much like, well, it wasn't that bad. You're not an alcoholic. Whereas, for me, it was bad enough. Now, if someone wants to call me an alcoholic or not, it doesn't really bother me. It was bad enough for me. I don't have a good relationship with alcohol. I don't drink successfully. When I drink, I'm not the person I want to be. And I don't care what you want to call that. That's enough for me. That's good enough. But I don't always think that phrase is used that well, to be honest.
So how was that, for the first time when you stood up, I presume it was in the Priory, was it one of those meetings where you said, hi, my name's Luke, I'm an alcoholic?
No, you don't. That's Alcoholics Anonymous. You don't do that in the Priory, but you do that in AA meetings. No, I think in the Priory it was more about education of what problems are with alcohol. You've got to remember the people that, and I was absolutely in this boat, the people that rock up in the Priory are full of denial, full of ego, full of self-importance, full of a list of excuses as to why that they've behaved in the way they have. All complete maniacs, all interesting people, but it's just a sort of eclectic collection of lunatics. And that's why the people in I talk about the Priory because that's where I went. I'm sure there are other brilliant facilities out there, but I can only talk about the Priory. The therapists in my time there were absolutely exceptional people. And a large part of that was educating us as to what a problem with alcohol looks like. And, it might sound really obvious for the things that we were doing, but it wasn't obvious to us. So we needed to be guided and educated.
And you were put on a 28-day program when you were there. Can you just talk more about that program then, Luke? What did that consist of?
Well, the first week, it tends to sort of be just settling you in. So, in the first week, I was really just getting back to eating 3 meals a day, trying to sleep, a solid 8 hours. In that first week, I I'd have really bad sweats in the nights, in the night, and I wouldn't sleep for 8 hours. I'd wake up every 2 hours or so. And it was really about, that first week was about getting people, effectively detoxing them and getting you back into a healthy routine, meeting your group, starting to interact in your group, starting to talk, share your feelings. Every morning you do diaries. You have to write a diary, and then you have to read it out to the group, and then the group can feed back. It might have changed, by the way. This was 8 years ago, but and then in that first week, as you're not expected to do much, but you listen, because there'll be people that have been there a bit longer than you. You listen to what they're going through. You engage as much as you can, and then really in the second, third, and fourth week is when it steps up. And you do various sessions around trying to identify your behaviors and your attitudes to life, of where they come from, what triggers them, just becoming really self-aware of everything around these sorts of issues. And you do lots and lots of different types of sessions. And once I became engaged with it, I just found it absolutely, I couldn't get enough of it. I knew I was tapping into something that I needed. I desperately needed, and it took me towards the end of the second week to really engage. But from then on, I was in. And then as you get towards the back end of the 28 days, it's very much around preparation for you to leave. What are you going to do? How are you going to support yourself? You've been cocooned in this lovely facility that feeds you, and changes your sheets when they need to be changed and things like that. And suddenly you're out in the big wide world with all the stresses and often the problems that you've left behind. And so that last week is very much about gearing you to be ready for that.
And the chapters in your book, Luke, about the Priory, they're very emotional, and it's a real roller coaster what you went through. But then on the other side, there's a little bit of comedy in there. You met a big character called Lenny.
Yeah,
I loved the bit in your book. He was a Scouser, and he came over to you and was like, "All right, there, lad. What are you here for?" Apologies for the Scouse accent, by the way.
That was very similar to it. Yeah, he was. Yeah.
And he said, "Come here, give us a hug, lad." And that, what was he? What was he like as a character?
He was amazing. I mean, I've got to be careful. Lenny's not his real name, no. So he was amazing because he had a massive impact on me. We couldn't have been more different. He was this little guy, Scouse. He always wore big puffer jackets. He was really intimidating. He was little, but he shaven head and kind of could stare through you. He was from the streets. I was this sort of silver-spooned professional cricketer who thought I was better than everyone else. And he didn't. There was everything about me that might mean he would shun me. And he didn't. He didn't shun me. He actually welcomed me and embraced me and took me in and looked after me. And he was the first person that I heard in the group sessions that just showed this level of vulnerability and honesty, which I just found utterly inspiring. He spoke exactly my language. He was a drug lord. I was a professional cricketer, but he talked about exactly the same feelings that I talked about, and he had a massive impact on me. And and then when we sort of parted ways, I was really upset at the time, and but I'll never ever forget him. He had a massive impact on me.
Are you in touch with him now? Do you know what he's up to?
No, being totally honest, he changed his phone number a lot for for his profession, and so you'd sometimes get a text from him out of nowhere on a totally different number, but that drifted away. I don't know where he is now. I worry, and I did worry for him, because I know how much he wanted to be a better man and find peace, and I know how much he loved his family and his kids, and I know how badly he wanted it, but I know how much he struggled on the outside as well. He was going back to a pretty tough world, and whether he was able to stay on the straight and narrow, I don't know. I pray that he has, but I'm not sure.
I think one of the, again, correct me if you think I'm wrong, one of the defining moments I picked up on when you were in the Priory was was it when one of the counsellors there who was giving you a talk and he brought up your ex-girlfriend Nia out to the blue, and that was almost a hit home moment for yourself?
It was, yeah. Um, he was a remarkable therapist. I mean, he was like a lion tamer. My group was very male dominated, a lot of kind of testosterone, driven idiots, me at the forefront. And he was like a lion tamer, and just could take any of us on and defeat us very easily. Yeah, and there was this particular session where he wrote God on the board at the front, and everyone just kicked off immediately. And we're going, oh, here we go. It's all going to be about God and religion and da da da. And it actually turned out, I mean, people need to read that bit in the book where I talk about it better. But really, what he was confronting us about was control. Did we believe we were always in control of everything in our lives, and why were we so obsessed about it? All addicts have having a problem with control, all of them. And he brought up what happened to Nia to kind of make that point to me, to kind of shock me. And I just used to cry all the time in the Priory, and I think I cried. But it had the impact, it broke through, and it made me think. That was the thing. It made me really start to understand the sort of dynamics and the angles that he was trying to get me to look at things and understand this obsession I had around control.
Well, I'm sure Nia's looking down on you now, and she's probably very proud of the person you've become and how you've turned your life around as well. I really do, Luke. I'm sure she's probably thinking at the time.
Oh, thank you.
No, it's okay. I'm sure she's probably thinking at the time, stop crying, Luke. Just stop crying.
Yeah, enough now. Enough now. Yeah.
Were you that emotional person before you went into the Priory, or?
I've always been quite emotional, but I think I just had so much pain built up in me. I don't know. I think I felt honestly like I cried for 2 weeks. I just cried in every session. I think I talk about in the book, there's this thing in the Priory where they don't hug you if you cry. It's basically it's to let someone cry, because they're crying. It's important. So they don't touch you, and you're told not to touch other people, because if you sort of rub someone's back, it puts them off from crying. And so I'd just be sat in my chair, just bawling my eyes out whilst everyone just waited for me to stop. But I had so much pain built up in me that I needed to let it all out, and I needed to find, and I guess I just, tears are healing, and I found my healing through that.
It's a wonderful book, and I'll put links on my podcast side for, onto the Amazon side, because I recommend everybody go out there and buy. It's one of the most emotional books I've read over the last few years, to be honest, Luke.
Oh, thank you.
So the question, you retired back in, was it 2011? So yeah. Why now? Why, 9 years after you retired, did you decide to release this?
Yeah, it's a brilliant question. I was actually, I was asked to write a different type of book by a book publisher, by the publishers who released this book. And I started that, and I just, that book's actually coming out in November. That's about sports management.
Give it a plug. What's it called?
Yeah, there you go. But I started writing that book, and then my fiance Jo said to me, why don't you write about your own story? And I don't know. I guess at the time, it just felt the right time in my life to be able to do it justice. So it's not just about being able to write about what happened to me. It's also being able to write about my perspective around it and what I learned and how I grew out of it and how I came out the other side. And I think you can only do that when you've had time, and in my case, it was 8 years. I needed those 8 years to really understand what had happened to me. So I just got to the place where I was comfortable and I could do it justice. I was, it's my truth. And I don't mind what people think of me when they read this book, because it's my truth. And that's really empowering. That's the one big reason. The second reason is, and actually it was triggered a little bit by me watching the Ben Stokes incident a couple of years ago, and when he got in a fight in Bristol, and I just watched the reaction to it at the time, and I was as shocked as anyone. I absolutely was. And I had to explain to my son why Ben Stokes was punching someone in the streets in Bristol. And I didn't feel good about that. But I was concerned for him, that this was going on. And I watched a lot of the reaction to it. And, there was, and from very high profile ex-players saying, well, it's just the way he is, he's a warrior on and off the field. And we've got to expect that he's not going to be all, nicey off the field, because that's what makes him the player he is. And I just had this moment where I was like, are we really saying that for Ben Stokes to be the best cricketer he can be, he's nearly got to get himself in jail for assault? Is that the best that we can come up with? Because that's absolute nonsense. It's just absolute nonsense. And I don't know, it was a tipping point for me. I'd seen so many incidents over the years, so many players, so many professional sports people being under this persona of that's the way they've got to be. And actually, it's just a cry for help a lot of the time. They don't want to be like that. Ben Stokes doesn't want to be nearly going to jail. It's the same happened with Freddie Flintoff back in the day. It was all like, well, this is the way Freddie is. And he's not like that now because he turned his life around. And I don't know. I felt like now's the time. I don't know if anyone's going to listen. I genuinely didn't know. I just thought, well, I don't know if anyone's going to listen, but now's the time to tell my story and why and what I think around it. And I hope it has an impact, because I think that's really all we can do in the world, isn't it? Just do our bit and be the beacon of whatever we're passionate about, and hope it goes out to, the people around us and then the people around them. And I just feel in professional sport, we've got to now go beyond that kind of attitude, of where, well, boys will be boys. And a lot of the time it is people showing behavior which is really destructive. And unless we take it seriously, it will eventually destroy them. And I just want people to listen to that, really.
What are your thoughts about the care of mental health within the UK at the moment?
Well, on the broader sense, in the kind of our NHS, and there's so much more that needs to be done. They're desperately short of funding to have the kind of mental services that the country and we deserve. And when I say we, I mean the population, not people who've suffered with mental health issues, but everyone, because it does affect everybody. I think if I talk about cricket, we've got much better at talking about mental health and being empathetic and understanding it. But I still think we've got an awful long way to go in really understanding how it starts, how it comes about, and how it can show itself in different ways. I think that's really important. Sometimes I think we a bit like what I was talking about, we can see certain types of behavior and think it's just an overindulgent young man, whereas actually it might be someone who's got a few problems going on. So I think we've got better at talking about it. On a broader sense, I think there needs to be much bigger funding, but over an even broader sense, I think we've got a long way to go in really understanding it and really understanding how to help people with it.
And you've touched on it before regarding social media. And whatever people say, social media, it's a fantastic tool. Yeah, it really is, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, but you are prone to trolls and it can affect your mental health. That's a fact. In the sports industry where you've come from, have you seen that affecting people?
100%. And I think social media is here to stay. It's not to be. We can't. And it's brilliant. It is brilliant, and I'm on social media all the time. So why? Because I enjoy it, and I find I get something from each platform that is different, and it's here to stay. And my kids are growing up in a world in which it is going to be very much part of their lives. But I do think we have to be careful with it. When I first started playing cricket, I went to go into. I've got this distinct memory of going in to go and get some money out of the bank when I was in Somerset, and the guy behind the counter looking at me, kind of double checking my face and my name, and then he went, "Oh, are you Luke Sutton, the cricketer?" And I said, "Yeah." And he said, "Oh, I picked you in my fantasy cricket league this year. And I went, oh, right, great. And I kind of perked up. And he said, well, I only picked you because you were cheap. And I, at the time, I sort of was a bit shocked and then had a bit of a giggle about it. And I always giggle about it after that. But I had that little interaction in a bank with a guy, which was nothing, it was fine. Social media is like that, but in an amplified steroid way with millions of people. So, you just go onto social media. Someone can go on immediately after a game and be absolutely bombarded by, all sorts of stuff. And it has a massive impact on people. And, we can all go, well, don't go onto social media, but that's not the world that people are growing up in now. And so I don't think that's realistic. I think more that the support around players and it's not, I'm talking about sports people because that was my world, but it can apply to everybody. But the support around them of understanding it and seeing it for what it is. And if someone's going through a really difficult time, supporting them through that time is so important. Because if a young, if you're a young man or woman, playing sport, and you believe that your affirmation comes from social media, you're going to run into some problems.
And that was a fantastic bit you put in your book. If you look now, at the end of a cricket match or football match, players in the change room, before, I presume there'd be a lot of banter going around, but now first thing they do is grab the mobile phones, looking for that. You always say, self-affirmation. How did I play? What are people's thoughts on me? That is scary.
It's really scary. Yeah, it's scary. And they're not, and they're all looking at their phones. They're not talking to each other. And, I went through over my sort of 17 years of playing, it went from a transition where at the end of to start at the end of a day's play, we'd all go down to the bar and have a pint and talk about the day's play. And that wasn't great because we drank too much. But one part of that was we did talk to each other, and we talked to the older players, and we talked to the umpire, and we shared our feelings about the day's play, and it was real. And there's something really strong about that. And I played a lot of cricket with an Australian cricketer called Stuart Law, who was as hard as nails. But he used to do that. At the end of the day's play, he would just start talking to you about what had happened. And often it would be stuff you didn't want to hear. It would be some home truths about, something you should have done better. But we had that communication. Whereas often now, if I walk into a dressing room at the end of the day's play, everyone's just looking at their phone, wondering what Joe Bloggs has said about them, that shot they played or that catch they dropped. And it's not real. It's a false world that they're gaining that information from. And as a result, in sport, the number of potential leaders has dropped off. And I'm not making that up. If anyone wanted to go and check it out for themselves, you go to 15 years ago, there'd be 6 or 7 guys that could captain a county side. It'd be a real competition for who would be captain. Now, they'll come up with a maximum of 2 possible candidates, maybe 3 in certain teams, but it's normally 2. And why is that happening? Leaders are not being born and no one's talking to each other.
What about trolls, Luke? Have you had to deal with these bloody keyboard warrior trolls on social media?
Yeah, I have, and I've got better at being able to deal with it. I used to bite all the time. And now I have to just see it for what it is. And I just try and show them a bit of love and respect, which doesn't feel like what you want to do, but I do, and try and diffuse it with them. And, but it's just, you just hear the anger in people and the frustration, and don't know where it's coming from. It's just bizarre. And it just makes me feel sad when I see some of the things that people say on social media now. It's just, I know since the Caroline Flack tragedy, everyone's talked about it, but I felt like this for years. We have to be better as a society, be kinder. We don't need, be careful with our words. Words really matter. And we don't need to do that, whether we're sat behind a keyboard or in a pub or on the phone. Just be careful with our words.
On my last show, I interviewed a doctor over in the States, Dr. Shauna Shapiro, and she is a mindfulness expert. And it is about getting that balance in life. And as you said, being kinder and being self-aware of where you are. What techniques have you adapted at? Have you adapted mindfulness or meditation to have a more positive outlook on life?
Yeah, I have, most definitely. I mean, I love meditating, and I go through spells where we do it quite a lot, and then then not so much. But I get a lot of benefit from it. But I've worked really hard in these last few years to become more self-aware. Please don't think I get it right all the time. I absolutely don't. But I often, if I haven't got it right, I know I haven't. I'm aware of it, and I can see my behavior and why it gets triggered by certain things. But it's just come over time, and it's come by listening to really good people and being around support and help. And it's really important. I think life more than ever is throwing up challenges at the moment for everybody. There feels like there's a lot of animosity and arguing, and ultimately we can only control how we behave in the world, and by becoming really self-aware, that becomes really self-powering.
And let's talk about your really successful business, Active Management, Luke. What is it that they do? And I was thinking this last night, how have your clients reacted to you releasing this book and your story?
Yeah, well, Activate, we do a number of things in sport, but we part of that is we manage high profile sports people and sports broadcasters. Most of my clients were aware of some part of my background, not all of it, but some parts of it. So it wasn't completely out of the blue. But I have to say they've all been really, really positive about it, and really supportive. And I guess it's made sense with a couple of conversations I've been having with a couple of them recently, once they heard about my full story as to where I was coming from. But they've been amazing, really, really good.
That's great. And regarding the future, you mentioned the book, which you're looking to get out in November. What else have you got coming up that you're really excited about?
I'm doing quite a lot of talks around mental health and addiction issues, and high performance wrapped into that as well, coming up over the next few months. I've got the second book coming out in November, which is nearly ready to go. I'm getting married in October, which is very exciting. The life's full of challenges for sure, but it's full of amazing things as well at the moment. And I really enjoy my time. It's precious. Time is precious for me nowadays, and I find a lot of excitement in lots of things that are coming up.
And for all those people out there, Luke, who are suffering some sort of addiction, whether it be drugs, alcohol, gambling, what message would you like to give to them?
You're not a bad person. You will feel like you're a bad person, and I don't need to put shame on you. I know if someone is struggling, the shame they're putting on themselves is bad enough. You're not a bad person. You just need help. And I would always encourage someone to reach out for help if they have addiction issues. But I would also encourage the people around them to help them. It's really tough when you're down. I didn't rescue myself. I needed people to help me. And it's tough being around someone with addiction issues, because their behavior can be really bad, and they can annoy you, and they can hurt you, and they can upset you. But they're not bad people. They're just poorly, and they need help. And I would encourage both people suffering and the people around them just to remember that, and just look to give them help.
And finally, Luke, looking back now, what would you say your biggest regret in life has been?
I mean, as you've read my book, there are things that happened that I wish hadn't happened. I wish I hadn't done some of the things I've done. But I'm here now. Would I be here where I am now, even having this conversation with you, if those things hadn't happened? I don't think I would be. And so I don't regret any of it. I know it sounds really daft, but I don't. I needed to go through that journey to be able to come out the other side, and it was a brutal ride, but I'm out the other side. So I don't regret any of it. I glance back at the past like I'm looking through a rear view mirror. I don't look at it too often, but I know it's there, and I just glance every once in a while. But I just concentrate on now, what's here and now, what's in front of me, and everything in the past has just helped me get to where I am now.
That's great, Luke. Well, thank you for coming on Behind the Life, and I do wish you every success in the future. You've shown with fight, support, determination, listen to people, that it is possible to turn your life around. So thank you so much, Luke.
Oh no, thank you very much for having me on. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you. And that was another episode of Behind the Life podcast with myself, Adam Lambert. Please give me a follow on Instagram at Behind the Life podcast, Facebook Behind the Life podcast, and if you're listening to this on YouTube, please hit the subscribe button below as well as the like button. I'll be back soon for another episode. For now, take care.